Brothers and if sisters are watching, sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I, of course, had the honor of accepting the invitation to spend a few minutes talking about our Lady Zaynab al Kubra. May God's peace and blessings be upon her and the rest of her family. Maybe a couple of items that I mentioned very quickly before covering the points I'm going to cover. The first one, I think, is that the Zaynab that we hear about usually is the one that is customarily spoken about during the events of Karbala. So I'm going to try to focus on the rest of the dimensions of her personality, hoping that the days and nights of Ashura, we hear enough about the calamities and the tragedies that befell her, as well as the leadership role that she played when she completed the mission of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and took over the leadership of the household, the remaining household of the Imam, basically made up of children and wives and widowed women at that time, under also the leadership of Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam. So that component I'm not going to be talking about. The second one is that this is a little bit of a kind of an improvised speech. I have a few points that I thought give us a little bit of an indication about her life and her character, and perhaps a few of the personalities in her life, and not necessarily like a free-flowing and logically well-structured linear talk. Zaynab alayhi salam was born in the 5th year after the migration of the Holy Prophet. She was the third to be born after Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein, who were respectively born in the 3rd year and the 4th year after the migration, after the Hijrah. So there's no doubt that she would have been the first daughter to be born to those two blessed holy parents, Imam Ali, Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, being her father and her mother. Her grandfather being the Holy Prophet. This would have been the first daughter to be born into that blessed household, that blessed family. And as we said, this is the 5th year after the migration of the Prophet. So the Holy Prophet, if we keep in mind that he passed away around year 11 after the migration, this would mean that she actually lived with the Holy Prophet, as well as her mother Fatima al-Zahra, for 5 to 6 years from her birth. So she would have seen and would have interacted and would have had the influence and direct upbringing of the Holy Prophet, as well as Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam during those years. There's a whole discussion about whether Zaynab alayhi salam was the only daughter born to Imam Ali alayhi salam and to Fatima al-Zahra or not. And the reality, if you read enough history and historians, there's really no consensus. You could really put them in two big groups. You could say half of our big historians say that Imam Ali alayhi salam and Fatima al-Zahra only had one daughter. And that daughter was Zaynab, who was also nicknamed Kulthum. The second opinion is that there was at least one more daughter born, and she would have been the 4th, she would have been younger than Zaynab al Kubra, who would have been called, nicknamed Zaynab al-Sughra, who was also nicknamed Kulthum. And the difference is that while one was more known by her first name, which is Zaynab al Kubra, the second would have been more well known by her nickname, which is Kulthum. There is no consensus, and this becomes a historical matter for debate between historians, and really it doesn't make that big of a difference. For those of you who follow matters of history, one of our great scholars by the name of Sayyid al-Mukarram, who is considered not only he's a mujtahid and a big scholar and a specialist in history in general, but of the history of Karbala specifically. He spent a lot of time. His maqtal is very famous. A lot of our scholars refer to it for the details of the maqtal. And he has a number of books about the incidents of Karbala and in history in general. And the conclusion he reaches at the end is that there is only one woman by the name of Zaynab, who was the daughter of Imam Ali alayhi salam and Fatima al-Zahra, and that is Zaynab al Kubra. So in any case, that would have been her first name and her nickname, Zaynab al Kubra, or Zaynab simply, and al Kubra would have been added for her greatness and her personality and her leadership, because there were other Zaynabs, generally speaking, in the household of Bani Hashim. And her nickname would have been Kulthum. So as we said, Zaynab alayhi salam would have spent about between 5 and 6 years with the Holy Prophet. And if you remember your history, that's also the year that Fatima al-Zahra also passed away. Not that long after the Holy Prophet. Between 30 days to 90 days after the Holy Prophet was the death of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam. During that time, one incident happened that is perhaps worth mentioning, and is that's a famous sermon. Fatima al-Zahra gave more than one sermon, but one of them is the most famous sermon called the Khutbah al-Fadakiyya, the Fadaki sermon, in which she went to the mosque of the Holy Prophet and spoke at length. She gave a very complex, sophisticated, eloquent sermon about her rights and how her rights have been taken from her, the inheritance left to her from the Holy Prophet. The interesting part about this, and I don't want to talk too much about the sermon itself, the interesting part about this sermon is that I'm going to talk about it from two different angles. The first one is the traditional angle, the religious angle, with the position of Ibn Abbas being the position of Ibn Abbas in Islam. Okay, Ibn Abbas is a well-respected scholar, companion of the Holy Prophet, well-respected as one of the greatest Mufassirin, interpreters of the Holy Quran, right from the beginning of Islam and onward. When he talks about the sermon of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, his chain of narration stops at Zaynab al Kubra, at Zaynab alayhi salam. That's from one angle. So if we want to look at it from the religious, classic, traditional lineage of the way we approach our reports, our Islamic reports, our ruwayat, our narrations and reports, with the chain of narrators through Ibn Abbas of the khutbah, the sermon of Fatima al-Zahra about Fadak, actually went through Zaynab. So Ibn Abbas reports from Zaynab alayhi salam. That's one. And the other one from Arabic rhetoric and eloquence. There's a very famous book, Balaghat al-Nisa, that talks about the eloquent sermons and poetry that was said, that was recited by famous women throughout the Arabic or Arab history. And one of them is the sermon of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam. And again, they say that it was reported through her daughter Zaynab. The interesting part, however, is that for someone to memorize this sermon, it does take a very, very strong memory capacity. The sermon itself is not short. It's not a very long sermon, but it is a longer sermon. It's highly complex. It's extremely eloquent. And the topics that it addresses are very varied. It's not like it's one topic where the flow is very logical. There is a logic to it. But it talks about the prehistory, or let's call it the history of the Arabs before Islam. And then it talks about the Holy Prophet being sent to them as a messenger. It talks about a lot of the rituals of Islam and the philosophy behind them. And then Zahra, peace upon her, starts using the Holy Quran, verses of the Holy Quran, to argue for her inheritance by using specific verses of the Quran. And it's a very complex sermon for a child between 4 or 5, around that age, to learn it in that manner requires a very strong intellectual capacity. And when people like Ibn Abbas are relying on her report, it's not nothing. That's a very significant matter. So something to keep in mind, because I think we all hear about how Zaynab alayhi salam, there are many stories about her intelligence, her intellectual capacity from a young age. I think this one is, for looking at it from a very historical point of view, there are foundations and there are scientific works based on this, and no one has ever disputed this. So something to keep in mind. After the passing away of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, Imam Ali alayhi salam, that's when he married other women. He did not marry any other woman during the life of Fatima al-Zahra, he married others. It's said that depending at different times and when you look, he married 4, 5, and perhaps even more women after Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam. Customarily, it would be traditional, it would be normal, I think, to see some tension between the daughter of the woman who passed away, her mother passes away, her father marries other women. We saw that even in the household of the Holy Prophet, other imams, other scholars, normal people, that happens. In the case of Zaynab alayhi salam, when we look at her history and the relationship in the household of Imam Ali alayhi salam, there are no such incidents whatsoever. And Imam Ali alayhi salam, he married these women, and I'll talk a little bit more about one of them because she's important. There's a few of them we can talk at length about. They had a relationship with Zaynab, but perhaps the one who is the most significant relationship with Zaynab alayhi salam, and again, because I'm trying to keep the events of Karbala to Ashura, I'm not going to talk about al-Baneen. I will talk about another one of the wives of Imam Ali alayhi salam, Asma bint Umays. Imam Ali alayhi salam married a woman by the name of Asma bint Umays, and there are things that I think we should keep in mind about her, as it reveals things about the personality and the life, the history and biography of Zaynab alayhi salam. Asma bint Umays was not considered just a normal woman at that time. There was a group of women called al-Khaf'amiyat, okay, from a family, okay, of Khaf'am, so al-Khaf'amiyat. In fact, they were a group of 7 sisters. And those sisters were highly praised by the Arabs in general for their wisdom, for their intelligence, for their, let's say, managerial and leadership capacity. And there are even reports by the Holy Prophet who praises them for their capacity to build a beautiful, happy household, basically. And in fact, her sister, Selma, was married by Al-Hamza. Okay, and Asma bint Umays initially was the wife of Jafar ibn Abi Talib, Jafar al-Tayyar. When Jafar, let's talk a little bit about Jafar. He deserves lectures, but let's talk very quickly about Jafar ibn Abi Talib, the brother of Imam Ali alayhi salam. At the very, very beginning of the prophetic mission, the Holy Prophet instructed some of his followers and companions to leave Mecca because of the persecution that they were facing. There's a group who stayed with the Prophet, and another group the Prophet asked them to leave Mecca and to go towards Habasha, Abyssinia, and to try to seek refuge there and to establish a community there. That group of Muslims was led by the instructions of the Holy Prophet by Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. When they left, he married Asma bint Umays and took her with him. And that's when they went to Africa and they established the seeds initially, but they remained there for Ja'far al-Tayyar, who would come back about 13 to 14 years later. So they stayed there for 14 years, where they taught genuine Islamic teachings, and they established a community that would have, far-reaching repercussions throughout history afterwards. Those were the seeds that were planted by Ja'far ibn Abi Talib at that time. So she accompanied her husband, and then he came back. While they were there, before coming back, while they were there, they had a son, born year 1 after the migration of the Prophet, by the name of Abdullah ibn Ja'far. This was the first Muslim to be born outside of the let's call it the Arabic Peninsula, living with the Holy Prophet, and let's say the land of immigration or refugees. This would have been the first Muslim to be born there. Abdullah ibn Ja'far, year 1. Years later, so a total of about 14 years in total in Africa, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib comes back to Medina, where he sees the Prophet. The Prophet he came back around the end of the Battle of Khaybar. And it's said that Ja'far al-Tayyar, he left his family at their homes and he rushed to the Holy Prophet to see in what way he could help him. When the Prophet saw him, he kissed the Prophet between his eyes, and the Prophet said, "I don't know what makes me happier, our victory in Khaybar or seeing Ja'far." So this gives us an idea of who Ja'far was in the heart and the mind of the Holy Prophet. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the brother of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And 1 year later is when Jafar passed away. He was martyred in a battle of Mu'tah, and this was a year later. Following the demise of Jafar ibn Abi Talib, and during that time that he was nicknamed Jafar al-Tayyar, afterwards the person who would marry Asma bint Umays was none other than the first Khalifa, Abu Bakr. He married her for a total of 4 to perhaps 5 years, until his own death in year 13. In year 10, she gave birth to a son to Abu Bakr by the name of Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. Keep those names in mind, please. There's a point to this. So the first son was born to Ja'far ibn Abi Talib al-Tayyar, year 1, year 10. The second son now is born to her from a different man, this time Abu Bakr, Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, born in year 10. A few years later, after the passing away of Abu Bakr, who marries her? As we said, Imam Ali alayhi salam. Now this, between two brackets, very quickly, I just want to mention this hint. As we said, this is a woman that was highly praised by the Arabs, and you see the types of personalities marrying her, and she's not saying no. And the only reason I'm mentioning this is because I think sometimes in our communities, in our societies, some women decide that I married once out of loyalty, I will never marry again. If there is some sort of exceptional emotional attachment, that's a separate topic. But we cannot think that it's valid or recommended Islamically for a woman, let's say, to put that aspect of her life aside and basically be unrealistic and live a different kind of life as a matter of principle, Islamic principle, so some people say, which it is not absolutely. Islam is realistic, it is practical. The woman can move on. It's not a sign of disloyalty to her late husband that she can move on with her life. Life must continue, especially in those strenuous, difficult situations that women used to face at those times, but life continues today and nothing has changed in that regard. In any case, this was a note in passing quickly. So Imam Ali alayhi salam marries her. Now she has 2 sons. And it is said that she actually gave birth to Imam Ali to a son by the name of Yahya, but he died at a very young age. Okay, so he did not survive to becoming an adult. The men started coming, and a lot of them through the friends of Khadija, to Imam Ali alayhi salam, Khadija being the grandmother of Zaynab alayhi salam, coming through those friends, coming to seek Zaynab's hand in marriage from Imam Ali alayhi salam, and the Imam refused many of them. And these were the personalities of that time, very famous personalities. And the Imam said no, and at the end he wanted her to marry none other than Abdullah ibn Ja'far, whose mother he had just married. So their difference was about 4 years apart, and that's the marriage that actually ended up taking place. So those 2 people would become very strong companions, allies of Imam Ali alayhi salam. The first one being Abdullah ibn Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, and the second one being Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, about whom Imam Ali alayhi salam even says, Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr is my son from a different man. Okay, and they were very, very strong, competent, loyal allies of the Imam throughout their lives, both of them. Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr has played very, very important roles at the end of the Battle of the Camel. It is he to whom the Imam asked to take care of bringing his sister Aisha back to her home after she had just attacked the Khalifa and Imam of her time, because he didn't want any foreigners or strangers to come and talk to her directly or disrespect her. So he asked her brother, who was in the camp of Imam Ali alayhi salam, having been raised by the Imam, to bring her back to her house in respect and dignity. And of course, this is in respect to the Holy Prophet. And throughout his life, I mean, Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr was also the one who was asked by the Imam to become the governor of Egypt afterwards. And it's very detailed history that you can review. As for Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, he was known to be a very wealthy merchant from early on in his life. He became a businessman, a wealthy man, early in his life. And some historians have said this is a result of a prayer from the Holy Prophet. They said that he saw him when he was very young doing something on the ground. So someone else would have probably thought that he's playing in the mud or something like that. So the Holy Prophet told him, Abdullah, what are you doing? And he told him, I am creating a vase with the mud so that I may go sell it and make a dirham, that I can go to the market and buy a little sheep with it. And so the Prophet said, may God bless your transaction. He said those words were the beginning of his wealth. From that time, he had a business mind at a very young age, and it stayed with him, and he became a very, very wealthy man. He was known for being of incredible generosity. At that time, people would basically consider him wasteful. The point to which he was generous, they would come to him and they would tell him, stop being so wasteful with your money. And there are many, many famous stories. I mean, in Arabic, they refer to him as Bahr al-Jud or Bahr al-Ata, which is the sea of generosity or a sea of giving. That's how much he would give. And he would say things like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made a habit with me, and I have made some habits with myself, and I'm afraid that if I break the habits with myself, Allah will break the habit with me. So he's basically saying the habit with myself is Allah gives me, that's his habit with me, and my habit is to give. If I stop giving, Allah is going to stop giving me. Anyways, there are many of these expressions that just show to what extent he was known in Ahlul Bayt, and they were all known to be. He was basically raised at the same time and with a few years difference of Imam al-Hassan and Imam Hussein in the household of Imam Ali alayhi salam. In any case, he remained at the side of Imam Ali alayhi salam all the way to when the Imam became the Khalifa. And at the end of the Battle of the Camel, that's when he was on his way back, Imam Ali alayhi salam decided to move the capital of the Islamic world from Medina to Al-Kufa. So when that decision was made, of course, his family, household, his followers, his allies, his supporters and assistants as a Khalifa followed him in Al-Kufa, amongst them Abdullah ibn Jafar. So they moved to Kufa. And this brings us back, and I don't know how much more time we have, we're at the end. It brings us back to Zaynab alayhi salam, where we see, so this is the kind of man she was married to. And I mean, I'm not going to go into his history and how much he gave and in what ways he would help the Imam. He was responsible for a lot of the, let's call them the business transactions and affairs of Imam Ali alayhi salam in a very competent way. In any case, we see that in Al-Kufa, history suddenly brings the figure of Zaynab alayhi salam back into action very prominently. And Zaynab alayhi salam played one very key role that I thought I'd just spend a couple of minutes on. She started teaching Islam in Al-Kufa. So don't forget, now we're away from the capital of the Islamic world. We're away from Al-Madinah al-Munawwara. We're now in another area of the world where perhaps those teaching Islam, those practicing Islam had a different version, and so there's a need for more, alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah, for a different kind of teaching, a different kind of instruction, and so she plays that leadership role and opens the doors of her house, and she goes to the houses of other women, and she has circles where she teaches Islam, and specifically she teaches Quran. Something to keep in mind, in today's world, when we hear someone is a teacher of the Quran, what should come to mind, because that's the reality, when you're a teacher of the Quran, you are most likely a memorizer of the Quran, and you can recite it professionally. Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah. So you recite it without mistakes, you recite it without any issues of pronunciation, of recitation, all of that is good. But the role of a teacher of the Quran stops there. You may not know more, but usually that's referred to by other labels, by other headings. But as a teacher of the Quran, today we concentrate on one dimension, one aspect, and that's the recitation of the Quran. But that wasn't the case at the beginning of Islam. When someone was a teacher of the Quran, they were an expert in all the dimensions of the Quran, including its interpretation. And anyone who has really studied the Quran would know that the Quran, the fields that you would have to know to be a full interpreter, a competent interpreter and teacher of the Quran are very, very numerous. From the lives of the prophets to Islamic law, to ethics and morality, to the philosophy behind the rituals of Islam, and so on and so forth. So for someone to be a teacher of the Quran, you are basically someone who understands the entirety of religion at that time. And this is exactly what she was. And some of our scholars have said, if we put aside the supernatural dimension of the words that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam used to describe his aunt after Karbala, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, and that we heard in the ziyarah right before, when he told her, Anti bihamdillah, by the grace of God, or with God's praise, you are alima ghayr mu'allama, fahima ghayr mufahama. You have knowledge without instruction, and you have understanding without the need for explanation. Okay, that's what Imam Sajjad is saying to a human being. It's not just empty praise. This is from an infallible Imam being said to a human being that gives us their status, that makes us understand what they are. But if we want to look at it only from a materialistic point of view, even that, there were actually proofs for it. When someone like Zaynab alayhi salam is teaching the Holy Quran to the people of Kufa at that time. So this was the status, this was the position of Zaynab alayhi salam in Al-Kufa before the incidents that would happen later. In any case, I said I wouldn't talk too much about Karbala. Let me end with this, my time is up. So they said that one day Imam Ali alayhi salam actually called Zaynab, and he was talking with her, and he asked her what she was teaching. And she said, we are teaching the Holy Quran, and we have reached Surah Maryam. And he told her, do you know what the letters mean? Kaf, ha, ya, ayn, sad. And she told him, tell me. And so this is when we have a ruwaya, we have a narration that tells us basically Imam Ali alayhi salam, how he linked those 5 letters, Kaf, Ha, Ya, Ayn, Sad, at the beginning of Surah Maryam. He linked them to the events that would happen in Karbala. And he told her about the events that would happen in Karbala. And of course, he asked her, he didn't say, do you know the meaning? In our words, we would say tafsir. He told her, do you know the ta'wil? So ta'wil is basically the hidden meaning that is not accessible to, me and my likes. It's the meaning that divine people receive from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as taught from the Holy Prophet to them and by them and to those who can follow them. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us follow in the footsteps of that great woman, Sayeda Zaynab, and to grant us her visit, the visit of her grave in Sayeda Zaynab, Sid Zaynab, the location, the region in Damascus, and her intercession in the afterlife. And sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa tahirin at-tahirin.